80 to 90% of the marketing budget is spent specifically to create signals, being able to measure the success of all those signals and be able to say, these are places where we spend marketing dollars to create signals. There, our sales team never wins or rarely wins, and it doesn't make sense. It creates a whole different way about how you look at the investments that you make. But companies that use multi-touch attribution don't see the data around the actual signals that the accounts are sending because there's too many data points and they're not forced to make choices around the data points and why they're doing them. I was at an event last Thursday, GTM Fund, Scott Barker and Max Altshuler and some other people are running that, and they have go-to-market leaders that end up being LPs, and there was like 50 people at a dinner in Austin last Thursday, and like the core like discussion topic around all the tables was signal-based selling. And it's really interesting because I feel like even just 3 months ago, like almost nobody was talking about it. And now everybody's talking about it. It feels like there's hundreds of vendors popping up that are either pivoting their product to like position around signals or just building new stuff around signal-based sales. There is some really interesting momentum going on in the market right now. I was listening to a podcast as well and just kind of want to share some of the things that I learned, specifically around like the category life cycle. And the theory is that the first 5 years of a category life cycle is basically like the develop and define stage, where there's a lot of vendors. It all looks like they're doing the same. They're all trying to solve a similar problem, but they're all doing it in a different way. And there hasn't been enough time or definition for there to be created subcategories around it. So it kind of looks like everybody's doing the same thing. And then between years 5 and 10, certain companies start to then break out, subcategories get created so that you don't see outreach and Sixth Sense as competitors anymore. You see them as complements, and there's some definition in the category. And then, 10 years and beyond is really like mature, milking the category. Commoditization comes in and price pressure comes in. It's kind of like the CRM category that exists today. There's still leaders, but there's a lot of people that are or shoes or any mature category. And so when it comes to signals, we're at year 1 of the define and develop stage right now, where it's going to take multiple years for there even to be definition around subcategories and how that's working. So it's just interesting to have a perspective around where we are in that life cycle related to this. It's really important. There's a lot of momentum, but it's also really early. And so I'm going to go through a couple of more thoughts as my thoughts continue to evolve. We got tons of follow-up questions, both from pre-submitted and things that spilled over from last week regarding signals and how that all works. So we're going to focus a lot of the episode there. And then if there's other rollover and things, we'll cover that toward the end. The first thing that I want to sort of talk about and continue to further explain is that the signal is an entirely different dimension of data that most B2B companies don't track right now. And so they track a leader contact, which is associated with a person. They track an account, which is associated with a company. They track opportunity data, which is associated with a deal. And they use all the standard objects that sit inside of the CRM, but they do not track signals. Just like we have a lead and an account object, we're going to need a signal object in the future that tracks the signals. What companies try to do right now, and I'll explain to you exactly why it doesn't work, is that they try to use the leader contact to create and track the signal. And the issue with that is that it assumes that there's a linear buying journey where there's only one signal that happens, that you can just stamp last conversion touch or recent touch on a leader contact and then flow it through and then try and copy it onto the opportunity. And then when you flow it through, if they ever come back and go through another signal in another cycle, that you overwrite all of the data and then it's gone. And then what happens with expansion signals? Just like in net new business, you could have customers that are current customers that send specific signals that indicate that they are ready to have expansion conversations. And you cannot track that on a leader contact that's already become a closed one. And so what we need to do is zoom out and say, we need an entirely new dimension of our data, which is signal data that then associates, just like a deal associates with a contact and an opportunity and campaign members. We need a signal object that associates with leads and opportunities and account data that is specific to tracking signals, where if you're in an account-based motion, it's possible that your accounts and the people inside of those accounts send you 50, 100 signals over the period of time, or potentially way more than that. And that trying to stamp one piece of data on a leader contact is just not an adequate solution. And it sits at a level where we've been using the lead contact opportunity copy that data for like 5 or 10 years now, and sitting with the standard objects that sit inside of Salesforce and running our go-to-market data, sort of like an assembly line between the lead object, and then it passes into campaign members, and a lead becomes a contact, and then there's activities associated with the contact, and then there's an opportunity finally. And you have all this data strung out across all these different objects trying to interpret a signal, where in our data right now, our estimates, our B2B companies don't have a signal attached to somewhere between 60 and 100% of their revenue. And recognizing that, and what happens when you don't have the signal data is you rely purely on fit data, and then you guess around the signals. And so I ask companies often, how do you optimize, or how do you know like where to spend that money, or how to use that channel, or when sales should follow up? And it's all about the fit. Oh, we're looking for like this type of account with this revenue range and this type of persona, and all that stuff matters. But they don't have a dimension, they don't have tracking around what are those people doing that indicates that they're ready to buy. Where is that data coming from? What is the success and outcomes of that data? And being able to have those two different dimensions and pair them on top of one another and say, these are the account demographics that we want, and these are the signals that we want from those account demographics. And they might be different by segment, where these signals work for enterprise customers, and these signals work for SMB or velocity sales that go through our SMB mid-market team. And the signals that you have for those different account profiles, those different geographies, those different segments, and why you win in those segments are usually very different. And I'm going to say the example again, when you think about, just to sort of hammer home this point, when you think about companies that only focus on fit of account, and not enough on the intent of the people in that account, is that if you could have the exact same person in the exact same account, okay, and that account is a good fit, and that exact person in that account comes to your website through organic search or direct traffic and says, I want a pricing request, or I want to meet with your sales team, and they book a meeting with your sales team. And then you could have the exact same person at the exact same account that is on a third-party website and clicks off and somehow downloads a piece of your gated content through a syndication vendor. And the demo request or the pricing request, you might win those deals at 10%, 1 out of 10. And on the content syndication, the data shows that signal is somewhere between 1 in 1,000 and 1 in 2,000, which means your sales team is taking 100 to 200 times more activities to generate the same result, which is incredibly unproductive. And what that shows you is it's the same person in the same account, but the intent really matters. Same fit, but the intent of that account and the person in that account really matters, and has a huge determinant in terms of sales velocity, sales performance, marketing ROI, everything across the go-to-market. And we need to be able to track signals independently and then marry that up with fit and other types of opportunity data. And it's going to create an entirely different view of how we measure and optimize. And I want people to try to internalize this concept here, where sure, B2B companies in their marketing department spend some money, maybe 7%, maybe 12% on brand, right? They're going to sponsor the basketball team, or they're going to hire a PR agency, or they're going to put a couple people in the corner and do a podcast, or maybe they'll run 10% of their LinkedIn ads with a brand awareness objective. They're going to spend some money on that type of stuff, but 80 to 90% of the marketing budget is spent specifically to create signals. You spend money with the goal of creating a signal. Think LinkedIn lead gen ad, Google ad, content syndication. You send an email trying to get a click through. You're investing time, money, and resources to create signals, and then being able to measure the success of all those signals and be able to say, these are places where we spend marketing dollars to create signals. There, our sales team never wins or rarely wins, and it doesn't make sense. It creates a whole different way about how you look at the investments that you make. And companies that use multi-touch attribution, I'm not here to tear down multi-touch attribution, but companies that use multi-touch attribution don't see the data around the actual signals that the accounts are sending because there's too many data points and they're not forced to make choices around the data points and why they're doing them. And so with all that said, let's get it started. But the questions and discussion the past couple of weeks have been awesome related to this topic. So what do you all want to know? What things don't make sense? What are you seeing in the market? Let's have a discussion and learn from one another.
All right. I'm going to go to Tom first. He had kind of a follow-up from last week.
Yeah, it was just more of a, hey, Chris.
Tom, welcome back. Good to see you.
Hey. I think it was what I dropped in the chat last week, and I just think it was a really interesting point to discuss on was, just in the same way any kind of marketing interaction would have different velocity through the funnel. So the signals, right? So a lot of we've kind of at early stages of looking at some of these things, and it's really because we're not tracking it in that full circle way. It's kind of like looked at as a lump, right? Oh, we're using, did intent data then drive a conversation? But intent data could be, multiple forms. So we have 4 or 5 different signals that we use. Some of them are used together. Some of them would become in 1s and 2s, right? So I think it's just a really interesting area to kind of explore how you kind of track that through. The object stuff is spot on. That is a huge gap. And knowing then what the SDR, what the AEs do thereafter from that trigger is another part of the puzzle. So they use a signal and then they do what? And then does that equal something? And I think that's the really interesting part of this discussion. And, the concepts around the object solution that you've put forward with over the last couple of weeks are fascinating there. But I'd love to get everyone's I'd just like to, or yours, Chris, and others' view on that. What do you do when it gets messy in that multiple signals realm? Because it could happen just before the tipping point. It could happen just after the tipping point, depending on how long it takes in deal cycle as well. So it can get quite messy quite quickly, just as a campaign, classic campaign within Salesforce does as well.
So a couple of points here. So the first one is to recognize that across the go-to-market investments, that there are investments spent in a lot of different ways to create signals outside of just the marketing dollars. So marketing program dollars often get spent to create signals, but then we buy data providers, and data providers provide signals and data. And maybe we have technology tools that are then looking to try and give us a PQL score, which is another version of a signal. And so to first recognize that these signals are across the entire go-to-market and come from a lot of different places, not just the marketing automation and marketing data, I think is one big unlock. Because when you think about like a intent data provider and you think about it in terms of like cost per signal, that an intent data provider might cost you $1 per signal, and then you have marketing over the corner running LinkedIn lead gen paying $200 per signal and getting the same exact result, which means that it's 2,000% more expensive to spend the marketing dollars in that way than to just use more of the data that's being provided to you. And so companies don't look at it that way. They look at their sales stuff and their sales investments in one way and largely do not track anything that happens when it comes to sales doing their own prospecting from the signal standpoint. Sure, they track some things like meetings and outreach data and stuff like that. And then they have the marketing stuff that they look at in a silo as well. And so first step is just recognizing that signals come from all over the org, from marketing investments, but also from data providers and technology tools. And looking at them holistically can provide some really interesting insights. And then I think really the first step here is a commitment that the signal matters. So I think we're even in that early stage where most companies that I talk to just think that it's all about fit. And that if we could just talk to the right person at the right account, then all of a sudden we're going to win that account. And it's not like that. You need the right person at the right account with the right signals. And so I think the first step is the recognition that signal is a new dimension that matters, that isn't being tracked appropriately today. The next step would be setting up the infrastructure, just like we track our accounts and our opportunities inside of our CRM, to also track the signals and then associate it with those other data points so we have all the signal data. And then the third step would be a commitment to, as we execute sales prospecting and things like that, to have it be a lot more driven based on actual performance data than just people doing random stuff, pulling data out of tools and like hoping that it works. And so I think there's like almost a sequence of things where like, yeah, it's a total black hole in outbound right now. But most people don't recognize that it's a black hole because they haven't like fully internalized this concept of a signal in the depth that you and I have. And then when it comes to multiple signals, to me, I just haven't come across enough data to demonstrate to me that there are so many signals and this is so complicated yet. To me, it's not. To me, right now, we've been able to clearly like isolate a lot of the signals. In the like far forward future state, it should basically be we're tracking all these signals, and then we have certain signals that are approved, certain signals that have been shut off because they have low performance, certain signals that are in experimentation mode that we're starting to deliver and collect data on, and that you have basically like a control center that says these are the signals that matter, then they're going to get enriched, distributed, and then taken action on by sales, and then measured through an SLA and data. It'll take a while to get there, but when you think about the future in 5 years and the crazy impact that AI is going to have on the customer experience and the human capital that we use in terms of interacting with customers for sales actions, and if you see that future in 5 years, you realize that you need the right data to be able to even have an AI machine run or do certain things. And that having the commitment to the signal data creates the foundation necessary for B2B companies to really use those types of tools. There are companies out there that sell a $2,000, $5,000 range ACV product through an AI bot to an e-commerce or self-service checkout. And there are SaaS companies that pay the sales rep 1 year of ARR to close the same deal. And it's incredibly inefficient and the math doesn't work. And as the funding environment changes, companies will realize they can't have $1 million in marketing spend and a bunch of SDRs and a bunch of salespeople to close a $4,000 deal. The math, it just doesn't work. And so then they'll come to the conclusion of, hey, we need like very efficient sellers and a marketing engine, or we need to use AI and self-service or some combination of that to be able to generate more results at a much lower total go-to-market cost. And I think that I truly believe that signals becomes the unlock, the missing piece about what companies need to actually have a lot of those things come to fruition.
Chris, that commitment to the signal thing is so, that is what we've been doing for the last kind of 6 months, is trying to experiment with what signals we may be able to get commitment from to run alongside what is a conventional kind of MQL kind of model. So yeah, you're right. And and even within that, people will still take, if you've got 4 signals committed, people will be like, yeah, I prefer those 3 over that one, or these 2 over this combination. So it's so true. It's definitely what's needed first of all. Yeah, really good, really good conversation.
And then just an acknowledgement that you can track signals and optimize against signals without changing your MQL demand waterfall. That it's an entirely different dimension that sits in a different place that pulls data from those processes, but you don't need to overhaul your entire go-to-market to track signals. And I think that's another key point that people need to recognize, because a lot of times you can do tracking to collect data, or you can do tracking to collect data and run operational processes. And a lot of people mix them into two, like, oh, if we track signals, then all of a sudden the way our SDR team does stuff and the way our sales force is set up, and all of a sudden something that could be fast and easy to set up and get value from becomes some big 12-month project because there's scope creep and expansion and things like that. And I'm encouraging people to just narrow in and say, the first step is all we need to do is agree that signals matter and then start tracking them. It doesn't have to change our comp plans. It doesn't need to change our attribution strategy. It doesn't need to change our CRM data. It doesn't need to change anything. The first step is we just need to track it. And I think that's another core point for people to that I think is misunderstood right now, that prevents people from taking action because of the scope creep.
Love it. All right. David, we're coming to you next.
Hi. Hello, everyone. Chris, great conversation as always. As you were speaking about an object and collecting all the information, so the thought that went through my mind operationalizing this is that we're creating an object at either the account or the buying unit level, and that we're trying to then bring into that object all the signals from all the disparate systems that we might have or have access to, like intent data or process data, engagement data, usage data, buying data, and all these different systems. Is that your image? Is that the thought that you have as well, or have I kind of jumped to a conclusion, or is it too early to really know how to populate this object?
When I try to communicate the signal as a different dimension, like how time is different than space, I think people struggle with the concept, and they always try to fit the signal into the lead and contact and account dimensions, which is sort of a little bit what I heard in your question, which I'll try to explain a little bit more. That one person or one account with people inside of that account could send you hundreds of signals. And just like we could have 100 opportunities open with an account, we could have hundreds of signals within an account or people inside of the account, which then forces or justifies using an object to track that part of it. And that what we're measuring is the signal and then the outcome of the signal. And we're pulling in the people that are involved in the signal, the company demographics from the signal. If it results in an opportunity, a lot of the opportunity data like ARR and LTV and things like that. And that it could work for a net new customer, or it could work for an expansion motion as well, where I think companies are starting to pick up on using intent data for expansion and renewal opportunities as much as in net new acquisition. And so being able to separate it out and see that it's a different thing that gets associated with people and companies, I think becomes something that I've been trying to figure out how to clarify and explain better. I still don't feel like I'm fully there, but would love, maybe I misinterpreted your question, but I feel like we should stick on this because it's a concept that I think is important that we haven't figured out how to fully explain yet.
Well, I guess perhaps I wasn't very articulate in my question, so let me try it a different way. We have an object for leads to capture all the leads, whatever that means, I guess, bad example. We have campaign objects, capturing different campaigns, members of those campaigns. We have account objects. Perhaps if we've got a named account approach or account-based marketing, we're organizing our system around account. So what I heard you say, or what my mind leapt to, is that for every account, I might want to have a central repository of my buying signals, whatever the signals might be, buying or selling or whatever it might be, and that I'm aggregating them all there. And that they are coming in sometimes from systems naturally linked to Salesforce, and sometimes coming from systems that are not naturally linked to Salesforce, right? So that you can have a single space to see them all. And then once you've got them, then you can choose how to analyze them and or if to take any actions at what point in time and so forth. But I kind of just viewed another table in the schema where there's an object, and now all of a sudden the fields in it perhaps are all the different signal types that I am automating to come into the system. Timestamping, I think that's another side to this that never gets mentioned. The need to timestamp everything. because everything is
100%. It's almost like I assume that people will do that, but it's so important. Yeah.
Right. Because if we're talking about the right time to do something, we need to timestamp the data that comes in so we can. I know. My question is another way to do this potentially, which I think would be perhaps messy, but I don't know possible, is that for every signal that we believe that we're going to be able to capture, we might create a campaign record, and that different.
That's what most companies do right now with a visible or a full circle. The problem is that then you need to figure out how to associate discrete signals against an opportunity with cross-object reporting. And it becomes a very complex SQL database type of process. And
so inner and outer joins that are a bit more complicated to report on than
and
you and I are going to do. I will do.
The campaigns typically are mixing offers and channels. They don't have tons of data like at a UTM level. There's a lot of issues with the campaign data, and then you pair that with needing to then look at hundreds of campaigns on tens of contacts in accounts that are associated with opportunities. It just becomes a mess. And so that's how most people they either try to do it with copying the data from the leader contact to the opportunity, which works in some ways and has a lot of disadvantages, or other companies try to stamp all the data on a campaign member that's attached to a contact, that's attached to an account, that's attached to an opportunity, and use a W-shaped type of model or something like that. And you're not looking at the real dimension, which is a discrete signal against an outcome. So yeah, they're ways that companies have tried to get there, but there are a lot of practical and technical sort of issues with that approach. And there are many firms that have come up with a sort of solution about using an object, but some objects are used to track an account journey, not a signal. And so when we think object and the purpose of the object, there are a lot of different ways. You could use a pre-sales object. We talked about that in a previous couple weeks ago. And knowing that the object is used to track a signal is a big thing, because we can have objects to track a lot of different stuff. So I love the perspective. I love the questions. It's something that I'll continue to work on. I think having some practical screen shares and data and stuff like that is something I'm going to be after in April as we get a little bit further on this. And so that's something that I'm looking forward to sharing as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I guess it's fair to say that my mind is a bit fuzzy beyond I've got an object that's attached to an account, and in it I'm collecting all the different sources of information that I might be able to get integrated into the system one way or the other.
You need all the signal data. You need the provider, the signal, 5 or 6 different UTM dimensions. If self-reported attribution is available, there's tons of different data, all the date stamping that happens related to the signal, when it got followed up with, the time between that. And so there's a lot of data related to the signal that is largely not tracked right now, and definitely not being able to be associated with an opportunity. Our estimate's 60 to 100%. So even companies that do use campaign members are not able to get there. And even companies that copy data properly from the leader contact, typically they're only doing that for marketing activities. So they still have all the pipeline and revenue created through sales prospecting or other types of forms like that don't have signal tracking. And it creates an incomplete picture that makes it hard to make real go-to-market decisions against.
Right. And one last thing is, I guess, some vendors are trying to provide visibility to their signals based on their tool in the panels that they add to the account record, right? So I imagine that, for example, those would be
ABM platforms do that. Yeah, they push data onto an account record in Salesforce with some type of intent signal. But then right when a new signal happens, they overwrite the old one. So you lose all the signal data.
You can't kind of do cross-panel activity unless you kind of create custom reporting. So, okay, cool. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, there's going to be a distinction, I believe, we'll see, between the signal providers and the signal aggregators, and then the signal trackers and signal analytics providers. I think there'll be a distinction. I know 6sense, and they're going to try and measure their own signal, but are inherently biased around the signals that they provide. And I believe that companies will use a different firm to measure the success of the signals than the people that provide the signals themselves. It would be like asking your content syndication vendor to provide you the reports about why content syndication is working so good. It's obviously biased. And so I think that there will be a distinction between a signal provider and a signal analyzer in some fashion. And you need both of them. Awesome discussion. Really appreciate you being here.
All right, we're going to keep it rolling. We've got Chris. He dropped a really good insight into the chat. So I wanted to bring him on to share and discuss.
All right. Thanks, Cindy. And Chris, great to join you here live. So my observation, and I think it mixes with some stuff you've said on previous pods around, bucketing your investment between demand generation, demand capture, and demand conversion, roughly. But I think there's going to need to be an ability to do analytics on correlation of the further up the funnel signals, so that as a marketing leader, I optimize my investment across, the entire funnel, and I don't just focus on the signals that lead to sales action, right? Then you're just kind of back into that world of, let's put everything into lead gen, right? Which is where we don't want to be. So I guess if I turn that into a question, who's doing that right now? And have you seen any case studies of people doing really good correlation of signals further up the funnel that may not lead to productive sales action, but that are the precursor to getting those signals in?
I think this is the main, I get this question a lot, and I think this is and from 100 million ARR companies that spend $20 million a year on marketing and aren't fucking around, that when you force the allocation across what you said between demand creation, intent capture, pipeline conversion, and expand accounts, that 80 to 90% of the investment is still spent to capture intent and convert pipeline. And that instead of buying some tool so we can measure top of the funnel, we need to fucking fix how we track that 90% of the spend, which is $18 million a year. And so while companies reach and they say, okay, let's go buy a tool so we can do marketing mix modeling on our $2 million a year investment in brand, they spend $18 million a year super inefficiently on Google and content syndication and all this different stuff like that. And so both are important, 100%. But I think we need to have an order of priority in how we solve them, the one being the most obvious and easy to solve with the most investment going into it, which is what I'm talking about in signal tracking. And that I love podcasts. I love running LinkedIn ads in a different way. I love connected TV right now. All the demand creation activities have superpower. And still, when I consult and work with, a bunch of companies, the priority still has to be on these two places where most of the money gets spent. And what it does is it takes your $18 million that isn't working hard and makes it $7 million that works just as hard, if not harder. And then all of a sudden you have $11 million to then go and pursue other things. And then you can figure out how to measure the top of the funnel, which is relatively straightforward from my perspective. It's just not the number one priority for companies based on how they invest and allocate right now.
Yeah, it makes sense. I wonder, though, how straightforward it is to connect the two, into the intent and the capture activities. That's where
I don't think you need to. I think that people have been sold this idea that, there's a customer journey and it's a linear thing. And so this thing happened 2 years ago, and then 18 months, this thing happened. So it must have been more important than the thing that happened before. And they use time sequence discrete points of thinking that something like that happened in a linear fashion. When in reality, what's happening is a person is considering buying and then they're not. They're considering buying and then they're not. And it's more of a movement between not in market to in market to not in market to in market than it is a linear process in one direction. And so when you think about it like that, what we need to understand is what are we doing to get our target accounts in market to buy? And then secondarily, once they're in market showing signals, what signals matter? And sure, long term, maybe there's some philosophy to correlate them together. But I think just thinking about them independently and measuring them independently would be a massive leap forward for companies and a logical first step.
Yeah, I guess don't let perfection be the enemy of good, and treat them separately, optimize them both separately. And then if you can do the correlation later, you do.
Yeah, to us, to people that look at the data that way, it's very clear what gets our target customers in market: podcast, LinkedIn content, word of mouth. Okay, great. When they're in market, what signals do they send us? Key people are on our website. They're asking to book a call with our sales team. They send me messages on LinkedIn and DM. They're commenting on my posts, and like the signals that people send are very clear, and what moves them to think about being in market is very clear. And we just treat them as two independent processes: one stream to get net new accounts in market to buy, or people that have been flowing from in market to out of market back in market, if you think about it more like a flow. And then once they're sending those signals, how do we take action with confidence and quickly on the signals that we have high confidence on to be able to get a meeting and progress that into pipeline and revenue?
Yeah. Sounds like my journey with you, Chris. It's great.
Yeah, a little like this. It's a really interesting concept for people to unlock, because instead of it thinking about side by side, like 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, that they're all building to something, to recognize that you're going in and out, and then you're starting over, and then you're back in, and then you're starting over. And it's more like that, where they're sending signals that they might be moderately in market. Maybe the performance would be low, but it's a signal nonetheless. And to think about it more like moving in and out, I think is a really interesting concept that fundamentally changes how you look at multi-touch attribution data. That is really tracking a linear buying process that isn't linear.
Yeah, it will require a mindset shift on the marketing leaders that are out there right now. So
it sure will. Every week I come on and talk to all of you, and you all have insights and questions, and David brings up a good comment and sends me some stuff afterwards. And even just the concept that I just shared with that is brand new, right? Like, it's not like the people out there in marketing are like ignoring this and stuff like that. We're actually figuring it out pretty quickly. Now that we've recognized, it's almost like back in the day with Demand Gen Live, David. Remember how fast the cycles were in terms of like put something out, learn, and it was like really fast, especially with the community. I think we're back in that phase right now where over the next 3, 6, 9 months, we'll see some real tangible evolution happening, especially with the people that are rallying around it.
All right. This one is on the signal topic, but it was submitted in advance from Jake last week. So if you are moving to signal base, should you still be splitting the funnel, or do you split signals? And does this affect your take with creating and capturing demands towards each category?
So you're still technically like splitting the funnel, but instead of applying a subjective thing that says, oh, these things are high intent and these things are low intent, that instead we're letting the performance data determine which things are high performing and which ones are low performing. And so it's just a natural evolution in terms of using the data to make the decision. It's still using the core same concept. Back in the day, it was, okay, here's what happens with your demo and pricing request signal, and let's split that from what happens with your content download and lead gen type of stuff. And then you just split them into 2 buckets of signals. And then you can see that the bucket of signals where the customer is asking to want to buy, i.e. a hand raiser, has significantly different and better performance profile than the people that are downloading content. And then what we're doing here is just breaking the signal down even further. So you have you're not like bubbling them up to categories, but you're looking at them at the individual discrete signal. So you'd look at this ebook download from a LinkedIn lead gen ad differently than someone that downloaded your ebook on your website, differently than somebody that downloaded the ebook from a third party. And you'd have all different signals, which might help you identify, wow, like this vendor, this syndication vendor actually works, while these other 9 don't. When in a split the funnel concept, you would put them all together into a category, and you may not see that difference in performance or granularity. But it's just an advancement of taking a simple concept of just taking quote unquote high intent and low intent marketing signals and expanding that to the entire go to market and not categorizing them into subjective groups around what we think about the intent, and just letting the data speak for itself.
All right. We've got another pre-submitted question here. Just pull it up. This one is from Marco. It kind of plays into signals, if I'm reading this correctly, but his question is, how do you think about making or marking outbound leads as MQLs. You would then be able to measure MQL to SQL for everything that your sales team is working versus just inbound right now. It kind of seems like he's talking about signals, but he's using departments to kind of segment this a little bit.
Effectively, what we're trying to do is have a complete picture of when our sales team reaches out, what was the account and the people that they reached out to, and what was the demonstrated intent of those accounts, i.e. the signal, so that we have both of these sort of pieces in the picture.
Thank you for going through my question. I work at a company where we have a bunch of SDRs, and we want to both test automating the first part of the SDR outreach process, which is basically doing what Apollo does, where you automate email sequences. Mm-hmm. And another part is we want to augment what SDRs are doing, so to make SDRs more productive by sharing with them sales intelligence. So at a very basic level, that means creating properties in our CRM where we know for every job title what is the pain that they're experiencing and what's the value proposition of our tool for the specific job title, and creating things like flagship customers for certain industries, and then having these both as variables that we can use in emails and as information that SDRs can use to then create one-to-one messages. So we want to test both approaches. And when I think about things like this, things like pain, and well, things like pain, for example, that pain can be inferred from a bunch of data points, and some of those data points can be signals. All this data, in my mind, can become information for lead scoring. And you can use this data to build your lead score and therefore have a certain score for your MQLs. And you can use that score therefore for outbound activities, and you can have some leads that are showing intent of some kind or are showing some signals of some kind becoming MQLs, and then you decide what you want to do with those MQLs, and it can be that SDRs outbound to those MQLs.
Got it, totally.
So in this case, they wouldn't be leads that have been qualified by marketing interaction. So they wouldn't be marketing qualified leads in that sense, but it will still be leads that are automatically qualified because they showed
through data or some other thing like that. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. So at a conceptual level of saying whenever our sales or SDR team does something, we want to be able to track what was the signal and why we're actually having them do something so we can have the outcome. Philosophically, that's what we're trying to do here. Using it as an MQL on the lead object just doesn't practically work, because you're going to have a lot of, and then an MQL score is just a signal. It's combining a bunch of discrete touch points and then putting it into a score to create a signal. And so when we think about this overall, we need, like, what you're saying philosophically works, but how it actually happens operationally would not be distributed in MQL to sales that came from the data, because a lot of those, many signals fail 999 times out of 1,000. That's the common thing for many signals that happen. And so you're going to have 999 failures for every one success, which means that success being a closed won customer, meaning that a lot of the signals that data that you collect is going to happen with multiple people and going to happen multiple times. And so using the lead object to house it, like I talked about at the beginning, just becomes a thing that doesn't work when you're tracking a lot of different signals to a lot of the same people and accounts. But overall, so that's why we use the signal object. And then out of the signal object, You have intent, third-party intent that's, pushing in there and then triggering signals to be created and tracked. You have a lot of the marketing signals that happen. Maybe your RevOps team's focused on looking at the data to try and create some signals as well. And then you have a repository in the CRM called the signal object to then track and measure the outcomes of the signals in the same way, sort of way that you're explaining with an MQL, but with a different technical implementation.
Very interesting. Is there any follow-up reading that I can go through or anywhere where I can read more about this?
So we're going to be putting more, I don't know, Sydney, I think we're going to be putting more stuff on our blog about this specifically, especially as we've talked about it a couple of times and gotten some good questions on it, that we're getting pretty close to publishing some core foundational stuff that people need. I'm also speaking on it at a couple of conferences starting in April. So we gotta, now I've gotten some pressure to actually figure out how to put the concepts together. So we'll surely have it sometime in April.
Yeah, definitely interesting because I'm kind of in RevOps, but I also work with marketing and I work with sales development. So
what's your role called?
Yeah, it's called outbound campaign specialist.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm inside
cross-functional,
of marketing,
yeah.
But we also have RevOps and we also have business development and we have field marketing. So like we have a lot of cross-functional projects going on. And my role is very cross-functional. Eventually, we all need to work with RevOps to implement our tactics in a way that fits our CRM. So this is very important, where to store the signal data, whether it's a company object, the contact object, or a signal object that we would have to create, which also means it's more difficult for me to get it off the ground because it means we are doing something new. So
potentially,
yeah.
The people that work cross-functionally, especially cross-functionally and like semi-tactically, are the people who really see this as an opportunity and a problem. Because if you're in your little silo in marketing or SDRs or even in RevOps, that is oftentimes just sales ops, that until you actually see the cross-functional stuff, you say, wow, what we're doing over here is measured completely differently than what we're doing over here, even though it's basically the same thing. And we don't have the data to understand between this process and this process, which one's actually working better. And just because they're held by different departments, we still need to know which one's working better to optimize the whole thing holistically. So the people that are in your role at whatever level that are up tactically and being in the operations cross-functionally are the people who will see this opportunity first, for sure, just like you have.
Yeah. But it's super helpful. Thank you. It clarifies some doubts I had.
Awesome. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
Yes, we are actively working on some content and documentation. It's a top priority for us at Facetto. So making it public to be accountable to you all. We have a last question here because I know we have to wrap up a little early. This question comes from Christina, and it's around signals and expansion. You mentioned expansion earlier in the call with signals. How do you see signals playing into expansion motions?
So first off, the issue with it and how it's currently set up today is that if you're using the data to copy from the leader contact to the opportunity, so let's say they go through that cycle and they actually become a closed won customer, and then you have all that data stored on the contact and on the net new opportunity. And then all of a sudden you create some signal, and then you're going to use it for expansion. That in order to stamp the signal on the leader contact, you have to overwrite the signal that created the net new data and then push it onto the stuff. So that's why operationally it doesn't work. And to be direct, like most companies track 0 signals when it comes to expansion. And so when it comes to expansion, it's like, oh, we were at a meeting and somebody were like, yeah, we're ready to add 10 more users. And we were like, yay. But there's not a lot of stuff that's predictive that's happening around. Here's consistently the signals that our accounts send us, whether it's in product, website or first party stuff, or things that they're doing outside of our first party properties. Here are the things that the companies do when they're going to expand that triggers us to create expansion opportunities that move into pipeline and, expanded net new ARR. And you would use the exact same process of tracking a signal object, having a signal, then pushing that into a sales action that might come from AM or CS instead of sales. And then if that created an expansion opportunity, and the expansion opportunity data and the account data would flow into the opportunity, and you'd have the exact same process on an expansion opportunity, which is just what are the signals that happen with our segments of accounts that dictate expansion potential and performance. And almost the same thing could be developed for expansion, which is definitely an evolution of my thinking, because I didn't think that was necessarily possible even a month ago. But at this point, I see it as pretty clearly that both of those things could be tracked using this method. Action-packed episode, everyone. That was cool. A lot of good stuff, new concepts. Appreciate you all being here. Awesome questions. We'll see what's up for next week. Sometimes I make like I mentioned, just like a lot, talk to you, get some thoughts, have some new thoughts, start testing it out with like customers and the people that we're working with, and come back even as early as next week with like refreshed and refined thinking. And so if that's the case, we'll stay on this topic for as long as is valuable to you and is working for us. But otherwise, maybe we'll move into other motions, and we'll see. I've been trying to set topics. I've been posting them in the comment of my LinkedIn post on Tuesdays, so you all know sort of what the topic is going to be. Maybe through email or other means, we'll figure out a way to more effectively get that to you, so you can decide and look at the topic and see whether it's like relevant to your situation. So we're still figuring it out. We're building the plane while we fly it a little bit, but the funny thing is that everybody's building the plane while they fly it. So just recognizing that, I think, is interesting as well. Just to close out, I was on a podcast that was a lot more about like mindset of an entrepreneur and stuff like that. And one of the core topics that I talked about that I thought was interesting is that this idea of perfection in business, like we always have to make the right decision and we can never make a mistake and it can't be wrong and things like that, is totally wrong and totally off. And when you look at some of the best people at their craft of what they've ever done, like if you look at like a scientist like Einstein, thousands of experiments failed before one mattered. If you look at an athlete like Tom Brady, he lost 5 Super Bowls, and still the greatest player of all time. Kobe Bryant had the same thing, missed tens of thousands of shots. And so when you look at all these other people that mess up all the time, but then when we come into business, we say all of our decisions need to be perfect. If we don't make a mistake, then like we're a failure, something's wrong. It's just not how it works. And so being comfortable about making decisions with imperfect data and following your intuition and what customers are telling you, and being comfortable that in 3 months, if you find out, hey, like we made the wrong call there, that it's okay. And that those things are part of the process of playing the game of business. It's a topic that I'm pushing a lot more because I have been a perfectionist in my career, and I've, taken things where things didn't turn out the way that I planned and blamed myself for it, instead of knowing that you're going to miss some shots when you play the game. And so maybe I'll share a little bit more about that as we go, but I found that perfection holds a lot of people back, that a lot of people use the idea of perfection as a way to not make a decision because they're scared of what other people are going to judge or say about them if their decision ends up being wrong. And so definitely in entrepreneurship, maybe less so than as an executive, but as in entrepreneurship, just like making decisions around whether people are going to make fun of you or whether people are going to say that you were wrong if you end up being wrong is just a really tough way to go about playing the game of business. And it's something that I've just learned. So I want to share some of that stuff too as I continue to evolve in like my own endeavors. So nice little way to close out. We don't have to be perfect. Like things are, it's part of the process, that making decisions is actually, and being able to make decisions and have them not be right and be able to use that as a learning is actually a strength, not a weakness. And I think we just need more of that in business. So with all that said, I hope you all have a great rest of your week. We'll see you again here next Tuesday. I really appreciate you all being here. It means a lot to me and I learn a ton from all of you. So thanks so much. See you soon.